Okay. And it's a gripping account of his fatalistic downward spiral. Now, when you wrote that, did that spiral take you down or did it inspire you?
Oh no, it inspired me. It inspired me so much that I actually made a film. I adapted the novel into a film, and it's called Frank Flutie, which is the name of the protagonist of the novel. I kind of changed it to Frank Flutie, the dude who did dictionaries. And it's about my experience of working at a corporate entity in Boston called Banker and Tradesman. So it's loosely based on my experience. My first job out of college was as a sales guy for a real estate financing banking newspaper. I basically sold ad space. And, not to date myself, but this is before really the internet was huge. Email wasn't even that prolific at this point. We're talking about 1997. So, it's a little autobiographical in terms of my experience in my first job post-college. And, then it kind of leans on the edgy part is that the idea of, is this possible? He leaves his job so he can write the first ever all-sexual dictionary. He's gonna capture every euphemism, every slang word, every word uttered in any Asian, hair salon, anybody in the steam room at the gym. So it's a challenge, and it's one that, he willfully tries to take on, but, then obviously there's a lot of complications that come along that way.
Well, this must have been an amazing book to do research on.
It was fun. Yeah, it was really fun. That was the sort of joy of it all, was, talking to different lexicographers and researching all the different publications. And, it's I like to think it's highbrow, but it has, obviously has a profane sort of undertone to it, but it's written from a real literary standpoint.
Yeah. Now, did you do surveys? How did you get this research? How did you find out all this information? Because, when I wrote Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, I sent out hundreds of surveys and people responded. How did you get your information?
There's a lot of research in terms of the plight and the early history of lexicographers, studying what it actually does take to put together a Webster dictionary. Usually it's a framework of teams. It's a lot of teams. So I start with sort of the history of where this guy stemmed from, and then I kind of build into him sort of, similar to me, breaking out from an agency. He decides he's going to go off on his own. So I spoke with a diversity of lexicographers. I read up on all, journals and diaries of different individuals and what it took for them to put together a real robust and real user-friendly dictionary. So that was the fun part,
It sounds like it must have. It sounds like this should have been a show on Comedy Central, because I think you'd be a good fit for them. Your next show.
You have to watch the film. The movie Frank Flutie, here's a funny bit, is that it stars my real father, Charles Mitchell, in the film as well. And my dad is a blue-collar painter out of Rockland, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. So we just had great luck where Frank Flutie was accepted and just screened at the Gwinnett International Film Festival in Duluth in Georgia. So we traveled down and did the festival circuit with the film. So it's been a nice cherry on top for the novel.
Oh, yeah. My dad was also a house painter, and I grew up in a real blue-collar neighborhood, probably very much like where you grew up. I grew up in Detroit, and you grew up in Boston. Isn't it an interesting background when you have that kind of a growing up in those kind of areas? It just gives your life you have a different look at life, don't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up in these projects called Rockland Place, which is a fun area to grow up in. I mean, we were resourceful little kids. We would take the carriages behind Kmart, we would stack them in the basketball courts, and we would use them as baskets. I mean, the stuff that we did as youngsters in terms of like our athletic endeavors was just so witty and crafty. And it really taught me a lot about life and probably molded me into the sort of resourceful person that I am.
And it also gives you that subversive comedic wit, because when you're living that kind of life and when you grow up in cities that you have to survive by your wit and humor, that's the only thing that will get you through. Don't you agree?
Laughter is the music of the soul. Yeah, you have to use it as a weapon and use it as a tool. And I believe it's amazing. I think there's a reason why you see a lot of these comedians too. They end up sort of transitioning into dramatic roles as well. I mean, we can reference everyone from Robin Williams to Jim Carrey. It starts with the humor, and I feel like it makes you they're really complex people.
Welcome back to the No Wine Zone. We're visiting with my guest, publicist, writer, director, Josh Mitchell. Josh, could you share with my listeners how they can go to your website, how they can get your books, and how they can watch your movies?
Sure. The best way to watch my work is via my director's reel, which is on Vimeo. I use Vimeo to... a lot of my films are for sale on there through their distribution platform called Vimeo Demand. And so that URL is www.vimeo.com /pick and roll. It's PICKNROLL. And again, if you Google Josh Mitchell, Wickid, Pissa films, all of my work will come up. My latest film is called Desert Drive, and it's called The Road to Coachella. It's about 4 LA musicians who make the 2-hour journey from Hollywood out to the Coachella Music Festival. And it's all about the sort of escapades that happen on the way there. The tagline is, sometimes the way there is half the fun. So you can check that out. It's been doing really well, and I'm really proud of it. It's a fun comedic piece based on another novel that I wrote called Spring Break. So please check that out. You can, if you're interested in learning more about my PR company, that's simply just wickedpissapublicity.com. My novel is available via Amazon. So just Amazon.com and type in The Dude Who Did Dictionaries, and you'll be able to find it right there. So I'm pretty easy to locate.
Yeah, you're certainly out there. And let's just talk about this other book that you released in 2014, Pissing on the Pulse of the Planet, a book that offers unique musings on sex, politics, pop culture, all viewed through the lens of Mitchell's subversive comedic wit. How do you go about, how much fun is that to make a movie? I bet is that your favorite thing in the world to do?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But the thing that's amazing about that book, Pissing on the Pulse of the Planet, and again, that really is my sort of, we want to trace, the inspiration was like sort of Henry Miller, and at that time, Howard Stern had released a book called Private Parts, and George Carlin had a book called Brain Droppings. So Pissing on the Pulse of the Planet is a nonfiction book, which basically it's the perfect bathroom reading. You can pick up at any page and sort of be enlightened. It's a collection of nonfiction essays that I write on, from sex to rock and roll to pulp culture to women. And, I've sold thousands of copies, and it's created a lot of funny ripples in my life, and I've featured it in a lot of my work. And, I consider it kind of like my college thesis. I wrote that when I was graduating from college, and then I partnered with a small publishing firm called Yellow Moon Press. And we brought it into the world, and it's people have been discovering it all over, so it's been great.
Well, you're very prolific. You wrote The Art of Football. You also wrote Spring Break, The Dude Who Did Dictionaries, Roid Rage, which is ROID. Which one is your favorite book?
My favorite book is one that's being released soon, and it's called Germ of a New Insanity. It's a wild piece. It's about an underground artist that uses the world as his paper. He writes on the back of stop signs, on the side of trains. And this one was inspired by my favorite artist, who's a guy named Keith Haring, who basically used the Underground Railroad of the New York City Metro as his museum. He would write on these blank poster boards that would be stripped, and he would use chalk. And he became so famous that later in life, not only did he get into the galleries to do this, but people began to steal his underground writings, and they sold for really big money. He was the protege of Andy Warhol, and I've written a biopic on him that I'm hoping is going to be my Academy Award winner. I know that sounds a little ambitious. It's kind of like the movie Jackson Pollock, where Ed Pollock starred as Jackson Pollock, and this guy Haring lived a really amazing vitality life. He painted and lived as hard as possible. He ended up, he grew up in New York City in the early 80s before anybody had heard of AIDS. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1990, but he was friends with Madonna and Mick Jagger and, all the other tremendous artists that came out of that period. And I think it can be a really amazing film. So I'm taking that to the studios out here in Hollywood now, and I'm hoping that it's going to end up being a major motion picture one day.